Welcome, my friends. Anthony here, 6 Scale Mafia. We are back with episode 2 in our toy photography guide 101 with my man Harry, cinematographer. What's up, my man? Welcome
Yes,
back
sir.
again.
Yeah, man, this is going to be an exciting one. I think we're going to talk about a lot of really important things that you're going to need to have if you want to take this to the next level.
Hot toys, figures, all that good stuff.
I mean, that is though, like part of your gear. You can't really take pictures of anything if you don't have hot toys, right? So
No, you absolutely are going to need that, of course. But of course, no, we're kidding, guys. We're talking about cameras, we're talking about lighting, we're talking about, adapters, we're talking about lenses, intermediate, advanced, trying to keep everything on a budget because we all know, like, we collect figures. We know hot toys, any other 6 Scale figures, they're not cheap. We're all broke, right? I mean,
story of my life.
Yeah. So we want to try to keep this in a budget-friendly zone, and of course, once you get some of those things down, if you want to go ahead and upgrade those later, of course, you can do that. But and it's not to say that because they're affordable, right, in a cheaper sense, doesn't mean they're cheap. You know what I'm saying, and you know what I mean by that, Harry.
Yeah, exactly. I think I mentioned this before. Like, you don't really need the best gear on the market, but the key really is lighting, and lighting is not very expensive. So if you have good lighting, you will have good photos.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need, I mean, like, there's people, you can use light bulbs, just regular light bulbs, if you really wanted to. All right, it's really all about, like, diffusing light, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the episode 4. I believe we're going to be covering a lot on lighting on that regard. But you're absolutely right, any kind of lights work. But, like, again, we're trying to keep this affordable. You're just coming in, maybe you don't have much gear. This is kind of what we're trying to cover right now. So now, if you're going to go ahead and buy any kind of cameras, my first camera that I bought was actually the Canon M50. This is the Mark II. This is kind of an upgraded version, but I mean, this is a good camera if you were trying to get into, actually buying something kind of introductory. But I mean, these still run like $600 to $800. They're awesome cameras. They're great for not only toy photography, but if you ever want to take photos elsewhere, you've got a nice camera that you can walk around with. So
yeah, unfortunately, even, entry level, some of these cameras can go for quite high. For me, you guys know, I shoot on a Blackmagic. It's a video camera. It's something that no one does. So I can't even feel like I can, suggest that either, because who's going to do that? Nobody's going to buy a video camera just to do toy photography. It makes no sense.
No, just you. But maybe there will be some people out there that say, you know what, I want to try to do.
If someone looks at my shot and they're like, I want it to look exactly like this, then yes, you go out and you buy the Blackmagic Pocket 4K. But I feel like the most important thing that we need to touch on are actually lenses, and which, lenses you want to pick, whether it's prime lens, whether it's a zoom lens, what kind of focal length do you want. To me, I think that's way more important than the actual body itself.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But at least having a body, like if we're getting into cameras, right? I mean, and again, like, Harry, you've got a very specific thing that you do, with a video camera versus an actual, like, conventional taking photos in that regard. But if you guys do and you have your cameras, then yeah, lenses absolutely are important all across the board, and we can talk about individual ones there. But of course, just as an example, the M50 is pretty good. I think it was the Nikon. I think it was the Z50.
Yeah, you don't have to go, like with the curtain model or anything like that. You can always, go back 2 or 3 generations and it will still be fine.
Oh, yeah, dude. You don't have to get like the top of, it's like with people with cell phones, maybe like they're trying to get like the newest version. Like, you don't need the newest version camera. Really, what it comes down to is the glass, right? Which the lenses, right? I mean, because there's lenses that were created in the 70s or 80s or 90s that are still in use today. Once that lens comes out, it lasts for decades, so glass is always, I think, the most important, as you mentioned earlier. But
there are many productions that still go back and use lenses, like you mentioned, way back in the day, in the 70s, that they came out, because they want like a very specific style and look.
No, it's all about that style, right? Exactly like you're saying. If you're going for a specific look, or specific, do you want like this ultra wide or this super narrow focal length, and this, there's all sorts of variables involved in here. But the same principle is going to be applied to toy photography.
I think it is important to just talk really quick about the differences between like a prime lens and a zoom lens, right? So a prime lens like this right here, basically means that I'm stuck to one focal length. I can't change anything. This is a 25mm. I can only shoot a 25mm, and I can't change anything about that. And on the other hand, this is a zoom lens, and what that basically means is that there are multiple focal lengths that I can switch between. So this one is from 55mm to 250mm, so that's a pretty nice range. So you can basically kind of decide whether you want a tighter shot or a wider shot without having to, manually switch between two different prime lenses. You can just switch between the focal length with a zoom lens. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah, exactly. And and if you're using Canon, for example, like I actually happen to have one here. This is like a 22, I think it's a 22mm. It's a pancake lens, but it's still a prime lens, right? So if you were to if I was to put this on my camera right now that we're streaming on, this would be a much different look here. You wouldn't see everything here that you're seeing. You're going to end up seeing a much tighter view with this one compared to what I'm currently using, right? But again, as Harry mentioned, with prime lenses, you're stuck in that millimeter. You're not changing that nothing's changing here at all, except your exposure, which we'll cover, later in the next episode. But as far as zooming or any of that, you're going to be cropping like in post, like in Photoshop or any photo editing software. And so if you're zooming in, obviously you're going to start losing quality the higher you go in, depending on what lens you're using, of course.
And also to keep in mind, taking your camera and zooming it physically like this is completely different than zooming in with your focal length, right? That's most people, don't know the difference between the two. So that's something that we really need to keep in mind, and that's why you actually want a zoom lens versus, just having a prime lens and then moving in and out physically. That's two completely different things. So yeah, those are some, some of the examples of which cameras you can get started out with. Obviously you don't have to get these. Like we mentioned before, if you have a phone camera, that's perfectly fine. Lighting, really, though, that's going to be the most important thing to me. So here are some, cool little affordable lights that you can get on Amazon here. This is the a panel here from Small Rig, an RGB panel. You can have different colors on there. You can also change between, different color temperature, white, orange, and all that. I started out with something kind of similar. Mine was the Pixel G1. It's around like $60. Kind of did the same thing, so this is definitely going to work for your setup as well. In film, a lot of people love to use the Aperture MC. They go for around $100. They're essentially the same thing, but you can control that with your phone, which is something that I really, really like. Yeah, so that's something to look into as well, if that's what you want. But for me, having a light is not the only thing that matters. What I love to do the most is bounce my light. And we'll talk a lot about that more in the lighting section. But in order to do that, you have to go and buy, honestly, just to get your hand on any white board anywhere that you can find in your house would do. Like a piece of foam or something that came with your Hot Toys or whatever. You could totally use that as your bounce. If you don't have that, what I also do is bounce my light all over the ceiling, all over my wall. If you have white walls and white ceiling, that also works too, but you should probably go out there and grab some sort of bounce card somewhere.
Oh, 100%. Like, bouncing is essential. And again, as Harry mentioned, we will talk about that in our lighting episode. But absolutely, I mean, you can pick up these lights, $35, $40. As Harry mentioned, some are a little bit more expensive. It just depends what fits in your budget and what you want it to do for you. As long as you have something that is RGB, which is, obviously allowing you to do any kind of colors that you want on that color spectrum. Light itself, right? Whether or not you're going to go to a low warm temperature, low Kelvin to a high Kelvin for that whiter light, basically any of those, they're all inclusive for the most part. And most of them nowadays do offer that connectivity, right? So you can control it with your phone. So keep that in mind. We'll throw, like you said, there's a couple here that we've shown already that do have phone capabilities. So it depends on what you want to do with that. But I would recommend probably three lights. I think are pretty essential, depending on the style you're going to do. And if you're going to get some tripods for the lights or some goosenecks, which we'll talk about here shortly, as long as you can do at least like a 3-point lighting setup. Again, that's something we'll be talking about a little bit later. but I would recommend grabbing at least 3 of these, especially if you're just doing static lighting positions.
Yeah, I agree. I think 3 is a really, really good point to start. And yeah, we are humans, right? We all have 2 hands here. So I think having some goosenecks is going to go a long way. You can just attach them to your desk, attach them to your monitor or whatever, and then just attach those panels on there. So you don't have to, you know, pull 3 different lightings and move them all around the scene. That's going to be impossible. So
yeah, we're not gonna be able to do that and control the camera, all of that stuff. So, and now this gooseneck here, this was actually for a webcam, but you guys can see here it has the thread here that can plug into the lights. And like Harry said, you know, with the necks, you can bend these any way that you want to get the exact angle that you want. Now, whether or not you're going to bounce or if you're going to do direct light on your subject, either way, you're going to have that flexibility. It's like having, you know, like you mentioned, like 3 extra sets of hands, basically.
Yep, like Doc Ock, basically, yeah. Which would be nice, right? If we're all Doc Ocks, that would be really helpful, but unfortunately we're not. So goosenecks is our next best options here. And yeah, I would grab a lot of them. You know, you can attach them to your lights. You can even your bounce cards on there as well. You know, so I would grab a good amount of them.
Oh
just to
yeah,
start
I mean, absolutely. You can look and see that if you have, maybe it's a little excessive, but if you have like 6 or 7 goosenecks there, you have 3 holding lights and then another 3 or 4 holding bounce cards. It's gonna look like a bunch of tentacles coming up off of your table, but you have more freedom essentially, right? You don't have to go that. You could just go with 3 lights, 3 goosenecks, and then kind of, you know, figure out how you know want to do your bouncing if that's something you want to do. But we'll talk about that again a little bit later. But of course, definitely lights, definitely goosenecks. That's definitely going to help.
And I just want to, I really want to stress that you guys need to get bounce cards. I don't care what you do. You have to get them. If you don't, I will personally go to your house and knock on your door. Please get bounce cards. I beg you.
No, it's very important. And we're going to show differences of why in our lighting episode. We're going to do some harsh lighting, and maybe not exactly harsh, but let's say like direct light on the subject versus bounced light on a subject. And you guys will be able to tell the difference and decide where you want to go from there. But honestly, yes, I agree with Harry. He's going to show up at your house and say, hey, use these bounce cards.
Yep.
Well, and look, it's cheap, right? Like you said, you can take anything. You can take a cardboard, even a regular brown cardboard box can technically be a bounce card. A shipper box from your Hot Toys can technically be a bounce card. You know, if that light is super bright.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind that whatever the bounce card, whatever the color of the bounce card is, that color will also be bounced back onto your subject. So let's say if you want to mimic sand, for example, like Anthony said, you can always use the shipper box because it's got that kind of like sand and tan color. So that color will be bounced, you know, back onto your subject.
Yeah. So again, it really just depends. Now that's the tricky part, right? You can say, well, you can have different colored bounce cards, but you also have different colored lights. So you can play around and it's fun. You can start experimenting, but no matter what, you definitely want to have some type of bouncing. And again, stay tuned for our lighting episode. You'll see exactly what we're talking about with that.
Yeah, I think another essential tool for your, you know, that you need to have is also your tripod. I can't recommend that enough. You can find a pretty decent tripod on Amazon nowadays for like maybe $30-$40. You don't have to go fancy. I know some tripods can go up to like, you know, $1,000, $2,000. You don't need any of that. You just need something.
No, you don't need that.
Yeah, you just need something that will basically hold your cameras perfectly still. And that's going to be very, very useful later on. And when we get to our lighting section and maybe our focus stacking and light stacking section, it will start to make a lot more sense.
So the other thing with the tripod is we're going to go ahead and cover this in our exposure triangle here. But one of the pros here is that, you know, you are taking photos of inanimate objects. They're not moving at all, right? So what you can do is, let's say you don't have too much light, or you have a very wide depth of field, you're going to need a lot more light in there. One of the ways you can compensate outside of, you know, obviously increasing your ISO is you could just increase that shutter speed, but you're not gonna be able to hold that device. So that was a big important thing that we're going to talk about in the exposure triangle episode, is that, you know, the higher that number is, the longer amount of time it's going to take for light to come in, which means you can't hold that camera. So tripods are essential for these because figures don't move on their own, right? So you're dealing with a static inanimate object. So tripod is essential. The other thing that I would note, if you're getting a tripod, and this also depends on, well, whether or not you're going to use a phone, or if you're going to use a camera, the next thing I would suggest is buying a Bluetooth trigger. And what that basically is just a little handheld. Think of it like your car keys. You know how you have like keyless entry on your car, right? You push your button. So basically it's a little keychain sized device here that we'll bring up here and show that basically what you do is you can connect this to your camera, you can connect it to your phone, and it will act as you pressing shoot. You're clicking the shot, except you're not actually touching your camera, because again, if that shutter speed is high, you don't even want to breathe on the camera, right? You know, you understand what I'm saying, Harry. So
yeah, that's a great point. Like basically when you're doing a long exposure shot, any type of movement at all will basically make your shot look super blurry. So that's why you need to have a tripod and to not touch that camera at all, which is why it's really, really great to have this Bluetooth tool that you can just, click from a distance and you can take your shot.
So I'll go ahead and show an example here for you guys. Now here is a photo of a pretty clear, pretty sharp image, as you guys can see here. Now this is used with a trigger. Now for me, I don't use the trigger myself because I use my phone as a trigger for my camera, right? But if I was on a phone, I would definitely have that trigger. I do have one for my phone if I ever do any kind of phone photography, right? However, you can see here, I just clicked the photo itself. I manually pressed on my camera, and you guys can see how blurry this is. And I barely touched this, but because that shutter speed was so high, any slight movement, it's not going to work. It's going to blur your photo.
Another tool that I use a lot as well is this little thing right here. Basically, it's just to give my scene a little bit of, fog, a little bit of depth, a little bit of atmosphere, if you will. I obviously don't recommend everybody go out there and getting a vape and destroy your lungs. But if you can, just invest in like a really cheap fog machine. Or I know that a lot of companies are coming out with like their own fog machine that's kind of similar to a vape, that you don't have to inhale, that you can just kind of press a button and move it around the scene and kind of have smoke and fog wherever you want. I think that is such an essential part of photography, because they literally do that on every movie set. Every movie set you see, it's completely fogged up, and it gives it that really nice atmosphere, that kind of like atmospheric fog, and that light ray coming through. It's a really nice subtle effect that will make your photos look a lot better. So I really cannot recommend having fog or just some sort of haze in your scene enough at all times.
Well, yeah, and just like this photo here that you took, you can clearly see it. It's giving you that atmosphere, right? Exactly what you're talking about. Some may wonder, well, did you do that in post? Did you add that? But no, that's practical. You can do that, of course, but having something on hand, like Harry said, if it's his vape, or if you get a smoke machine, any of those will work. You don't need a large one. They do have those large ones for like clubs and movie sets and things like that. But the handheld, right? That's what you're going to want, because you can regulate, and you can clearly see here in this photo how atmospheric this looks.
Yeah, I cannot recommend having practical smoke enough. Like Anthony mentioned, yeah, you can do that in post, but it's not going to give you that accurate light bouncing and scattering through the atmosphere and all that. You can only do that with practical smokes, and that's why they always do that on set. On every single big budget movie, you're gonna see smoke and fog and haze everywhere.
So that's going to cover our gear episode, guys. We didn't want to go too long on there. Just want to kind of give you guys, some beginner gears that you can get set up. You can go right ahead and start shooting with minimal effort. As you see, a lot of these stuff that we're showing here is pretty cheap. So we want to try to keep it affordable, as we mentioned before, right? We're all kind of on a budget. So, you don't want to go crazy and invest too much. All of this stuff is super easy to obtain, definitely affordable. So I hope this is going to help you guys. Let us know in the comments, if there's any other type of gear you want to hear about a little bit later, or any other questions that you may have regarding this episode. Definitely let us know in the comments.
Yeah, I think we're really trying to keep it simple here. A lot of people, they kind of assume that, oh my God, you must have, crazy setup with so many gears. But no, literally it's just camera, maybe 2 lights, and then a bounce card, and then something in the background, and as your background, and then just some fog. And that's all you really need. We don't want you to go out there and buy like 20,000 things that's going to cost you, $5,000, and then that doesn't really matter too much. So yeah, this is we're trying to keep it basic and affordable here for everybody.
Yep, and that's absolutely our goal here. So hopefully that works for you guys. Guys, stay tuned here. We're gonna have episode 3 coming up shortly here, where we're gonna talk about our exposure triangle here. So stay tuned for that. Be sure to hit that like, subscribe, and we will see you guys in our next episode.
Yeah, thank you guys.